All right, here today with a good friend of mine, Tony Batis from Palo Alto Swim Club, mate. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I appreciate you having me on your show, Brett.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. We spent a couple of days together a few weeks ago, and it was awesome just to see you and your team and your coaches and just the group up there in Palo Alto and the way that you've been running your business now for it seems like decades. The way that you've been
Too
doing
many
it, and
years.
just yeah, and having just incredible success. So it was nice for you to let me in on that. You brought me up to kind of help spark some conversation, and this is kind of an ongoing part of that conversation, maybe an extension of what we were talking about. I wanted to be able to share some of that with the world too, because we had great conversation between a lot of the different coaches up in your area. They came together one day, and we just spent 3 or 4 hours together just talking about how we can get better. So I think this is kind of an extension. I'm glad you're here today to do this, but just in terms of a little bit of background on you for the people that don't know you and where you are and what you do. Just let us know a bit about you.
Sure. I've been involved in the sport of swimming now for, 48 years, 47, 48 years. First as a swimmer, then as a young age group coach for about 4 or 5 years. And then I stumbled into the head coaching job at Palo Alto at age 25, and I've been going ever since. The process has been a slow developmental process, both between the X's and O's and learning how to coach and work with young athletes, and for most of us, learning how to run a business. And like
Mm.
everybody, there's been a lot of trial and error for sure in the process. And I think the common thread that I've learned through the years is learning how to grow as society evolves. I mean, we can even just hone in a little bit on post-pandemic society and how we've had to make some shifts in terms of how we approach both our business model and our coaching model. But kind of going back to the discussion that we had a few weeks back, I think a big part of our growth, or at least my growth in coaching, has come from exactly what we did a few weeks ago, was having these opportunities to sit down with peers, people you respect in the sport, and try to learn. It's hard to do on a consistent basis because everybody has their daily and weekly lives to attend to. But I think when you can just sit and have frank and open discussions about any aspect of our sport, it leads to what I think is a higher level of thought and consideration for what you're doing. Those 3 or 4 hours that you referred to me went by like it was 30 or 40 minutes. It was a very smooth flowing conversation, discussions on speed development, appropriate training. We had, Kevin Zatcher from Santa Clara, Don Schwartz from North Bay, Steve Marcelli from Pleasanton, and a bunch of PASA coaches. And there were others that were in there as well. But I think what you did as a moderator for the discussion and adding your input to the discussion where it was necessary was help to create a flow so that everyone felt like the conversation itself was more important than any one particular opinion.
Mm.
We can always agree to disagree on something, and there are moments where that occurred, but it was not a stopping point for the conversation. Rather, it was more than anything else a chance to kind of delve a little bit deeper into why one person felt a certain way and why another one felt another way. And I think that's, like when you're talking about a sport that's been around for years and years and years, there's only so many different ways to reinvent the wheel. What you're doing at this point, hopefully, is trying to find ways to make that wheel run smoother and faster rather than trying to build a completely new wheel. And I think that occurs through conversation and frank discussion and trial and error for that matter. So, yeah,
Right.
I would tell you, Brett, a lot of my background has really evolved to the point now at the age I'm at where I want to sit down with more people and have these conversations to sort of spark that notion of what is it we're trying to do as we progress our sport forward for the next generations of athletes and coaches.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and that's what I love about sitting down with coaches, even if it's just at a meet. You go out for a meal or whatever it is, and you kind of sit around a table and chat. But I think the thing that I love about the podcast is I can get someone in like you, and I can ask you very direct questions on the learnings that had over the course of your extensive career there at that one club, and why you stayed there, and how you've grown yourself. And people can listen in for the next hour. Maybe they're in a car right now and they've got this on and they're just listening to your voice, but they're taking in your learnings. And that's what I love about this podcast, kind of format. So that's kind of the basis of what we're going to do here over the next 45 minutes or so, is just really pick your brain so that we can learn from you, because you like you said, you've done a lot of things right. You've made a couple of mistakes along the way, but along the way you've learned and you've grown. But even sitting with you and talking to you about some of your former athletes who have come through as age groupers, and then they've gone on to college, and then maybe they've gone even on to pros and had extensive careers, like the impact that you've had from the moment they come into your program to the moment they finish with swimming, and then cycling through those generations, of like, then they go on to be doctors and lawyers and influential, people within the community beyond even just the swimming part of it. So to see the athletes that you have come in, and then where they end up, and then the next generation come in and cycle through. So in terms of just some basic learnings of what has kept you in that cycle for so long, why have you enjoyed that process so much?
I would tell you it's a mixed blessing. I think the challenge is, first, I always look at the process itself as you're sharing a journey. I'm not the only one going down this pathway. You're sharing a journey with young, impressionable youth, their families, other peers. And part of that journey is, a lot of it is self-discovery. You're figuring out, what is it about you that's able to communicate? What can I do to be able to be a better or more effective communicator? What is my message? What is the business that I'm trying to run? And internally, you have this dialogue with yourself. And I think what keeps you, I don't like to use the word relevant, but what keeps you sort of engaged in the process, at least for me, is that constant striving to find out, what's that next little thing I can add in. Now being involved as long as I have, I recognize the fact that there are plenty of things that I still don't know about the sport of swimming, even though I've done it for basically my entire life. But it's not for me a non-motivator. If anything, it sparks in me that little interest of, what can I do to get a little bit better at what I'm trying to communicate effectively to the people who I share time with. So I think in most cases, the motivating factor, everybody has little nuggets. They're hyper competitive, or they want to be super successful, or at the baseline, they want to help a generation of kids become the best version of themselves that they can be. I think all of that's part of the process, but I think what sparks it at the very beginning for me is that desire to figure out something new. And it's not, a new coaching technique. It's not necessarily a better set. While all of those things are applicable, I would tell you it's more just the overall experience, and what am I learning about, the stuff like wellness? What am I learning about recuperation? What am I learning about new areas of strength conditioning? What am I learning in general that might, again, if I go back to using what I said before, find a way to make my overall business wheel and coaching wheel run a little bit smoother and faster?
Yeah. Here's a question that I'm facing right now, and I have faced this in the past in college swimming too. When you're out recruiting and you're meeting a family for the first time, and meeting a 17-year-old kid and sitting down with their parents, it's almost like you have to hit the reset button every time when you're out recruiting, of like, what do you know and how do you know it? And it's almost like, you walk in, you think to yourself, they should know my experiences, they should know how much I know, but they really don't. And you face that same thing with kids that come into your group, and parents that come into your group, of like, they might have an understanding of what they think they should know, or the way that the kid should be, coached, and maybe the kid has their own feeling on that. And so you have to help them understand your experiences. And it's almost like this reset every time you have to go through it, of like, not reselling it, but like a re-understanding of like, hey, I know this stuff. I've been doing it for years. These are my experiences. You got to trust me. So how do you build in that trust to get them to value the experience that you've got? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think I may be a little bit more fortunate at the age I am at now because people use the word culture, and I've been fortunate enough over the years to develop and have had success in what we're trying to do as a program, that I think at least at this stage, I get maybe a little bit of a benefit of a doubt from a young athlete moving in, or maybe a new parent to our program. They assume that I know what I'm talking about. It doesn't mean that they still don't question or still don't have concerns, but I think from my standpoint, what you're trying to do is lay sort of the ground rules of what your overall developmental pathway or journey is going to be with that athlete, and that includes the parent. I think up front, because we're a competitive program, most of them want to know, how fast can my child be, or when am I going to make my first junior national cut, or those types of answers or questions. But I think from my standpoint, it's what is your end goal? What do you want to do 4, 6, 8, 10 years from now, and look back on the sport of swimming and said, this is what I wanted and what I actually received. And to me, it's somewhat, I use the visual of a plate of information. And on that plate, you're accumulating everything that you can possibly put on it with respect to that developmental process: time management, work ethic, being a great team player, team leader in some instances, a great worker, all of those things, and giving them systems to look at by which they can adapt that into their own process. The thing that I emphasize the most is, like, we're in a generation now, especially with the social media, that kids, if they're not engaged in 5 or 10 seconds, they'll just swipe right on you and move on to the next thing that's in their day. And I think that's a mistake from the standpoint of long-term development. And I say that to them up front. I tell them that we're getting ready for a journey here, and that journey is going to take some time. And that in that process of the journey, we're going to have some roadblocks, we're going to have some setbacks, we're going to have some successes and great adventures together. But that process can only be enhanced if you understand a little bit better what I'm asking you to look for beyond this week of practice, this training cycle, this season, et cetera. It's more, where do you want to be by the time you set foot on a college campus someplace? Where do you want to be when you retire from the sport of swimming? And what are we doing today to help you start on that pathway to get there? And again, like anything else in life with young kids and young parents, there is going to be times where you have to remind yourself that you have to re-message. I think there was a period of time in my coaching, maybe in the last 10 years, where because I'd had some success and because there were things that were going really well, I just assumed that every new kid or new parent that walked through my gate for my pool absolutely knew that and were completely ready to be on board and no questions asked. And the reality is, every year, probably multiple times within the year, you have to reinforce what you think is that journey for those individuals and those families, so that they don't forget, this is why we're doing this. Why am I setting my alarm to get up this early? Why am I staying up so late to finish my homework? Why am I missing out on going to this event with my friends who don't swim? Giving them that clear picture and that sense of purpose, and that we're in this together. It's not you on a little rowboat by yourself out in the middle of a huge ocean. You're there with a bunch of other teammates, coaches, family members that are helping guide you in that direction. So I think that for me, it's that consistency that I've had to really go back to in the last 5 or 6 years, of reminding them of what that journey actually is and where we are. And when we do have the setbacks, how do we sit down, reassess, and then continue on that same journey so that we can both come out of it in a place where we both feel good about that overall journey.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you some specific things, because I know people also love specifics. In terms of your weekly training schedule, can you run us through that, and why has that worked for you?
Sure. I would tell you, I'm going to take one step back, in that in my early formative years of coaching, I kind of went with what I did as an athlete and what the experiences I had in my developmental process. And we were still of an age and a time when I was competing where it was volume mattered, how much you did over the holidays, training wise mattered. And you threw it all into this big strainer and you hopefully hit your taper at the right spot. And, 2 or 3 weeks later, you'd have the best performances of your life. Over my 40 plus years of coaching, that's evolved, and it would be too long for this conversation. But basically, we're at a state post pandemic where I don't have as much time in the water. We do dry land, and I'll go through the weekly cycle. But I think to me, to be as effective as I want to be as a coach and help those kids attain the goals they want to, it's coming up with a system that I believe in. It's not a system that's not malleable, that you can't make subtle tweaks and changes to, but it's one that exposes them to as much as they need. And at its core, I'm not big on slow swimming. Doesn't mean there isn't slow swimming in my program, but I would tell you, if given the choice to drill at speed or drill as slow as you can, I would tell you, I want you to drill at speed. I want you to do things that are going to create some sort of neural links in your body that remind you how it feels to move as fast as you want to move when you're trying to be optimal at your performances.
Welcome to the Sprint Revolution School. This is the culmination of my life's work. Everything I've learned coaching some of the world's elite athletes, including Cesar Cielo, Fred Busquet, Bruno Fratis, and leading my Auburn team to the NCAA championship in 2009 alongside the legend Richard Quick. Now all of that knowledge is available to you. Our program is structured into easy-to-follow, interactive modules designed to take you from where you are today to becoming the fastest swimmer you've ever been. Check out the link in the description or simply search The Sprint Revolution on school.com to get started.
For me, I always start off the week. We swim Monday through Saturday. We're fairly traditional in terms of number of workouts. We're 9 workouts a week. We don't swim on Sunday at all. We do doubles on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and then all our afternoons, and we do a Saturday. The only thing we do differently in the summertime is we go 5 mornings because we can go later for the kids, and then we go 3 afternoons, so they have some afternoons off, and that also gives some of the college kids free afternoons to go to the gym and get some extra gym work in where that applies. I try to touch the bases on all aspects. I usually start off, the one thing I might be a little bit different, I'd be interested to hear comments and feedback, but I always start off Monday morning with a pretty hard kicking set, whether it's with fins or without fins, but it's a fairly intensive kicking set. We only have an hour and 15 minutes in the water. We may get somewhere between 4 and 5K in. Warming up and doing some light aerobic freestyle, but mainly focusing in on a good kicking set to set the base for the week. I consider your legs your engine, so get the legs going to start off the week is traditionally how I've started. Monday afternoon, albeit if we need to split up, we'll split up a little bit. We do a dry land session for roughly 45 minutes to an hour, and then we get in and we swim. That's probably, if I were going to say, one of our heavier volumes of the week. And I would tell you, let's be realistic. I'm a moderate volume program. We may get 40 to 50K in a week total volume. Workouts on average are probably about 5. There's some as high as 7. There's some as low as 3. So the average is about 5. Monday afternoons tend to be aerobic free, and that's where I'm going to ask kids to get some good threshold based work on, some interval work in. Main set typically is somewhere in the range of about 2 to maybe 3, as high as maybe 3,500, depending on what we're trying to accomplish in that given day. We'll come back on Tuesday. Tuesday is a day where we start to do some of our, I would call it, if there's a word, anaerobic capacity. I do speed work, but I try to do it with some sort of taxing element, whether that's interval, whether that's hypoxic, whether that's exercises that we do between swims or series. But that's a lower volume day of maybe 35 to 4K, but the intensity level, again, you can use any scale you want. I'd say it's probably, if you do it properly, it's like an 8 or 9, because I'm asking you to do everything fast. We have one workout specifically that's overload, where the sets are no longer than 400 or 500 yards, but you're doing every kind of conceivable exercise between all-out sprints and hypoxic work. And we usually break it up into a 20-minute leg segment, a 20-minute upper body segment, and a 20-minute overall segment. And at the end of each segment, they typically have a 25, 50, 75, or 100 off the blocks for time all out. I would tell you some of the hardest workouts we do of the week, if done right, is that Tuesday afternoon, but it's probably one of our lowest volume workouts of the week. Wednesday morning typically is a stroke development day. That's a big day where we re-emphasize stuff we do the rest of the week, but we talk a lot about stroke count, a lot of descending work for stroke. If drills are applicable, we'll throw drills in. Again, in an hour and 15 minutes, you're getting in about 4 or 5K main set, 1,500 to 2K. Still try to throw some extra legs in there. Wednesday afternoon is IM. On the IM day, I'm trying something a little bit different this year, and I don't know. It's early on, so we'll see how it works, but I'm adding a little bit extra pulling at the beginning before we get into our IM specific work. And my logic up front is I want them to tax their upper body a little bit more to see how that impacts their transitions of the stroke, the shifting of muscle groups, and their ability to get into sort of an aerobic stroke repeat set. IM day, I think people who've swum for me tend to fear that day because they think it's going to be, oh my gosh, how many 400 or 300 IMs are we going to do? And it's the furthest thing from the truth. We do a lot of IM connective work. We do a lot of transitional work. And the sets can be, in some cases, a little bit longer. That's a day we're probably at about 6, maybe 65. But I don't think there's any one set that's, hey, let's sit here and go 10, 300 IMs. I'm past the days where I sit and watch that. Last night was a good example. It was actually a pretty good set. We went 2,800, and we went, it was a 300 IM, but it was basically a 200 IM plus 100 free where you're working on freestyle closing speed on a threshold interval, followed by 450s IM order kick fast. We did those on 50. And then you finished up the round with 450s of your primary stroke, trying to hold 200 pace at, I think we went 50, 50, 50, and then they went on a minute on the fourth one to get just a little bit of a reset. And we did that round 4 times. That's 2,800. And we had kids absolutely knocking it out of the park on the 50s of stroke, the 200 stroke pace. And I think stuff like that at times, it may sound daunting, but when you get into a rhythm and a flow of a set like that, it's like watching a good kid swimming a race and executing good splits and knowing where the challenges are going to come and when to make shifts. I watched that set, and there wasn't anything that I had to yell out and say, please do this better or remember to do that. They got into the rhythm that the set created for them and did a great job. So
I like that. I like that, and I don't mean to cut you off here, but I was listening intently, and I love your sets. You actually gave me a set in the car as we were driving to the airport. It was a 125 threshold on 130, and then a 75 fast, and repeat that. But you also said you can also add in 225s underwater in between of the 125 and the 75. So I actually did that as well, and it was a great set. And like you said, the rhythm of the set and breaking it up. Why is it like some people see a set and they think the longer it is, the better it is, but it's actually, I find, like you said, the rhythm and breaking it up into sections, that bite-sized pieces, they tend to attack it better and able to maintain, and like you said, it becomes competitive as well and things like that. So it just becomes overall a better workout when you can break it up. And that's basically, what we've found as coaches is that the best workouts are the ones where they can be engaged and they can give effort and they can execute correctly rather than just swimming for length, Yeah.
Absolutely. And what I would tell you, it's like a double-edged sword. One, obviously, most of what my sets are meant to simulate what the kids are going to experience in a race. You want to find a set where you might be taxing the legs in the middle and then count on them to try to be really strong on their legs at the end of the race in like this last night's set on those 50s, where you have to be tough and do that so that you're mimicking what they're going to see in a potential 200 in a race themselves. But I would tell you, even if I bring it back as simplistically as possible, if you do something for 30 or 40 years, if I'm giving a set that's going to make me want to sit down and cross my legs and not watch anything, why am I giving the set, right? You have to create engagement. You're trying to engage kids, but you're trying to keep yourself engaged. And if you have 20, 30, 40 athletes in the water, you have to find a way that's going to not only motivate them, but find ways for yourself to look for those small things in the course of a training set, whether it's a speed set or a more of a traditional aerobic set. How am I keeping myself engaged to make sure that they're accomplishing what you put down on a piece of paper for them to do that day? I think a lot of what I do now hopefully causes them to think in the moment, but more importantly, when they go to race for the first time, oh yeah, we did that set and that's how I felt, and this is what I should be doing right now. And it's not just as simple as, a lot of us, we try to marry a lot of that to remember what your kick count is, or remember what your stroke count is, or where your breakout points are. And those are all 100% valuable, but it doesn't mean anything if you get to the last 12 and a half of 100 meter, 15 meters of 100 meter swim, and you're locking up and all you do is revert to what you do in practice. When you get tired, you go to shorter strokes, terrible technique, and you just try to will your way to the end of the line. In training, if you're teaching them the things that not only from a neuromuscular standpoint they're trying to remember, but mentally remember, oh yeah, Tony always tells me, go to your legs the last 15 meters, up your tempo the last 15 meters, whatever it might be, you're planting the seeds for future success and competition. And that's where I think, irrespective if it's a 200-yard set or a 3,000-yard set, you have to give them something that is tangible for them to stay engaged with. No matter how bad my day was at school, no matter how much homework I have tonight, no matter who I got into an argument with, for these 10, 20, 30 minutes, my focus is X. And Tony's going to be on me about X. And I have to stay engaged with X no matter what. And if I do that, I think what you find is, you're like anything else in life, you're not going to bat 100%. You're going to have some kids who are just too overwhelmed by the homework they have, and their mind is elsewhere, and they're not going to stay engaged the entire set. Remind them of it. Maybe that's the little sidebar conversation you have as they walk out the gate. Hey, what's going on? You got a lot of homework? All right, let's try to see if we can manage that. Is there anything else you can do to help yourself recover from that process? And let's come back and clean slate the next practice. It gives you ways to send the messages to them that I think are important for that, again, eventual competitive advantage you'd like your athlete to have when it's time to do so.
Couple of things. I do want to talk to you about recovery and the value you place on it and how you get them to understand the value of recovery. So I want to talk about that, but before we go there, I want to just ask, how do you get them to understand that they may be training for different events? Let's say you have a couple of athletes that are certainly training for the 1650 because that's where they're really good. And then you maybe have a couple of athletes that are training for a 4 a.m. because they're really good there, or that maybe you have some 200 swimmers who are really good. And so like there's different events that some athletes are certainly going to be swimming and others may not. But how do you get them to value the understanding that, hey, you're going to need to do this because of that's what you're training for here, and you're going to need to do this because that's what you're training for here? There's just the variability and the variety in the events that they're training for. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think it's a great question, and it's one that I think I would tell you most coaches struggle with, only from the standpoint that, like, I don't consider myself a sprint coach, a distance coach, a breaststroke coach, etc. I'm a coach, right? I'm a developmental coach who works with athletes who range in age, in my group specifically from 15 to, sometimes I get a few post-grads or college kids, but 15 to, let's say, 18 or 19. For me, I'm a big believer that I am training, and that's exposure to that gives you the best sort of pathway for overall neuromuscular development. It doesn't mean that all my kids have to swim 200 and 400 IM. It doesn't mean my sprinter has to swim a 200 fly. What it means is that in the developmental process, number one, there shouldn't be a single event that you're afraid of. I don't care if your best event is 50 free to me, the premise is there should be nothing in the sport of swimming that intimidates you. And everybody's heard this a million times. Tom Jager's first junior national cut was in the 1650. Caleb Dressel broke the American record in the 200 IM. Katie Ledecky swam an American record in the 400 IM at one point for a very short period of time. I think the notion of exposure to eliminate fear is a valuable tool. I'm also big on believing that in practice, not in every single session, but a couple sessions a week, if you're working on transitioning muscle groups in your training, i.e. the varying strokes that you do, I think you're helping develop those overall neural pathways. At some point, do we lend a little bit more emphasis to kids who excel in a certain given area? 100%. But I don't think, and I would argue, even up through 16, 17, that needs to be the majority of what they're doing. Now, I know it's in other areas of the world and even probably other areas of the country, there are people who, if somebody shines in 150 and 100 breaths early, that's our sweet spot and we're going to kind of delve into it for them. I personally believe you're missing a part of the overall developmental process. How many times in your lifetime in the sport have you talked to somebody who started off as an age grouper, as a backstroker, and became a freestyler, or was maybe a breaststroker young, and then they eventually became a distance freestyler? I think, to me, if you kind of overemphasize hyper-focus too young, I think you miss the boat on the opportunity for overall long-term growth and development. Now, having said that, I think within the framework of the group, when you talk to your kids, you have the frank discussion. Hey, you've got a 2-beat kick. You're not a very good kicker at all, yet you want to sprint. Well, we have some options here. If you want to sprint, we have to figure out how to develop some of those areas that you're just not very good at. Or you should try to see how your body responds to, you're already fairly aerobically inclined. Maybe we need to look at some longer events and just see where that takes you. I don't think you have to pigeonhole. I just think, from my standpoint, the thing that I hate the most is I never want to tell my kid, hey, I'd like you to swim this event, and then suddenly get that look of dread or fear on their face because, oh my God, it's too hard. The sets they do in practice on certain days of the week are way harder than any race they'll ever attempt. But the mindset of it needs to be, I'm tough enough, I'm good enough, I don't have to be this, that, or the other in order to, to be able to complete a 200 fly or a 400 iron or whatever it is. So it's maybe a roundabout way of saying it, but I think it's conversation. But I think from my standpoint, it's exposure early and eliminating fear of early. And then as they start to shine in events, then discuss the parameters that they need to be successful in those events and what they'll need to improve upon in order to continue to move forward.
Yeah, I love it. Let's get back to one of your favorite sets. You say you do a lot of kicking and kick development. Give me something that you would do, maybe on a regular basis to work on, that leg endurance, let's say.
I would say, and I might have mentioned this at our little forum. I can't remember if I did this, but again, this is something small that I stole a lot of years ago, and basically everything I've done is a rehatched plan of something that I've heard from some other successful coach. So this is probably something I borrowed, but doing folded arm back dolphin as a precursor to anything I'm asking my kids to do fast, underwater, at the surface, on or off a board, I think is a great way to sort of rev the engines. If you think about like a drag race car, that just before it goes, it spins its tires really fast so they get the tires hot and they get more traction. I think when you isolate the vessel in this case being the swimmer's body, from that normal streamlined position to a folded arm, it's basically holding your arms in that position above your head while you do back dolphin or stomach dolphin. You can do it with a snorkel on and do it fast in 25s, a series of 25s. It can be, we typically don't do more than 2 or 4 in a row, and then we just go back to that and might do that 3 or 4 times. I wouldn't say there's a week that goes by where we don't do it at least 2 or 3 times as a prep foundation to get ready for whatever we're doing kicking wise, whether it's a long set or a all underwater 15-meter fast set. I think it really gets that engine, it gets every part of your core, which you have to be engaged for those kicks, ready to go. And we often find a lot of our kids, without me having to remind them, when they're warming up, not necessarily at the beginning of the morning, their large warm up, when they're warming up before their races, if they have a hunter fly or hunter back or another race that dictates a little bit of fast underwater work, they're 100% utilizing that folded arm dolphin to kind of get that core ready to go. So that's probably one of my more standard go-tos. On kicking sets, I would tell you every variability you can come up with and that everybody's done over the years is in play. We do some for volume, we do some for intensity, we do hypoxic. I find that what ends up being the most successful for me is in any given week, and again, this is a gross generalization, but I say between 35 and 40% of my volume of the week is kicking of one form or another. And I would say early season is probably larger, and then it drops down. And since you want to rest the legs the most for big competitions, it drops down to lower percentages as you get into the rest phases. But I tend to do one set that's going to be challenging aerobically, and it can be. I don't limit myself to distances. I love doing some longer kicks with fins where you're asking them for consistent underwater kick count, whether it's big kicks. I know Dave Durden does a lot of big dolphin kicks, small dolphin kicks. They do a lot of stuff on their side. I like that type of stuff where you're asking them to just be honest with movement over longer distances. And again, I think the length of the distance doesn't matter. It's a question of creating some consistency in number of kicks or breakout points and the types of kicks and getting comfortable in all kinds of positions. I like to do a lot of speed kicking off of resistance. And again, there's so many things you can do. I mean, people use drag socks. People will even kick with parachutes. There was the old thing of tombstone kicking where you keep the board upright and half buried in the water so you have that resistance. You can do a number of those things, but I don't do those to just fatigue the legs. If I'm going to do something like that, I might do 325 tombstone kick and then go a 50 all out no board kick, flutter and see what you can do, right? Or whatever the combination is. And I think at times you have to get even creative as to where you place the fatigue. Sometimes you might want to fatigue the legs early, like I just said, 325s, and then do something fast to work on closing end speed. Maybe you want to do a fast 50 up front all out and then go 425s with some form of resistance. Maybe it's a parachute, and then come back and see if you can have another 50 that matches your initial 50. And you go and come 100 easy off after that. You can mix that up, and that's your own creativity. But I don't like doing resistance kicking just to have resistance. If I'm going to do it, then I want to see something fast as a result of it. And we do that, as I say. We're trying. I think I said this at the conference where we try to do more measurables this year, and we're trying to do more measurables like this year with kicking, pull-ups, or pulling. Because we've always placed emphasis on it, but we haven't put down a measurable for the kids to see. And I think some of our kicking measurables have already shown, at least in my opinion, some really good feedback. Our ability to hold what I would consider race pace kicking speed over duration and a set amount of repeats has improved immensely. And that to me, we'll have to wait and see how that works in terms of when we rest. But right now, I think our legs are in a better place than they've been.
Well, I was going to say, would you test that on like a 1 rep max to say like we're going to do a 100 all out for time and test if their 100 time is improved?
I would say yes and no. I would say yes, absolutely. But I think that's a little bit further into the season. I think up front, my measurables are a little bit more based on repeats, similar to if you were doing a Saturday 8 100s on 8 minutes, dive from the blocks, and you're trying to go. That's maybe something you do in September, October. But if you're getting into late November, you're probably or early December, you're maybe doing, 1, 2, or 3 of those 100s, maybe even on a 10 minutes or 12 minutes, right? So I think with kicking, that's probably the truth. I think right now we're a little bit more on the higher volume side of measuring our kicks. Like the last kick test we did was 9 100s on 3 minutes. and it was a great test. When we get to the end of especially with our speed guys, I'll be measuring 25s and 50 speed, on a one-off when we get into probably for us mid-November on until their big meet, maybe even a little bit earlier depending on the athlete. Some of them who tend to have longer swims might be measuring off of a 150 or a 200, and having it be more of a steady state, strong kick, something that they can manage over a longer swim. But up front, I would tell you that the primary difference is up front, we're probably doing more repetitions of, and then, in any sort of 10, 12, 14-week cycle, sort of creating a downward trend towards how many reps we do so that hopefully you're getting that one special performance. And I'd even go so far as to say, this year we'll do it for sure. When we do our final suited test set swims, 2 weeks, 3 weeks out, one of those will be a kicking effort. I think right now, if I'm playing around in my head, it may be something like 2 100s and a 50, the 2 100s being swim and the 50 being kick. I don't know what order yet. I'm still kind of debating in my head what I'm going to do with that. But I would tell you that I think as far as measurement and performance, that's going to be, get your race suit on, go all out 50 back dolphin, ready, set, go, and see how that sets you up for your 100 back or your 200 back, depending on.
I like that. So that's some good stuff there that people can take away from this. I'm writing notes as you're talking too, so I like it. It's good. Part of the natural progression of the sport, I think, has been kind of the evolution of recovery. And it used to be back in the day when in the 90s, 80s, 90s, when I was training and growing up, it was how hard can you work, how long can you work for, what's the breaking point type thing. And I feel like we've evolved beyond that now, where recovery is certainly a huge part of training. And I think this is where we're seeing kids getting faster. Like we're getting faster somehow. So this is certainly part of the process, and the value of nutrition and sleep and hydration and mobility and stretching and all the different factors that go into recovery, even massage therapy, physical therapy, things like this. I mean, these are things that are incorporated into weekly practices now with coaches that certainly weren't there 20, 30 years ago. So how do you place recovery and emphasize it with your kids so that they understand the value of it?
Well, I think, again, the swimming paradigm has changed significantly, for sure, if we're going back to the 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, in that we have kids who swim fast all year now. It wasn't the older paradigm where every 3 or 4 or 5 months I would peak and I'd be able to perform, and the rest of the time you would kind of slog through and do the best you can, but would struggle because you were in this sort of constant state of fatigue from heavy training. I think now, from a multitude of reasons, we're in a state where people are performing every month of the year, and albeit every coach has their own system by which when and where they want to swim fast, there's not a month in the year where somebody someplace isn't going fast. And when you have kids who see that and are striving to do that, you have to implement things that are going to be helpful for their overall process. When we talk recovery, earlier in the conversation I alluded to, and again, if I really sat down and we said we were going to have a recovery conversation, that could be another hour and a half easily.
Right.
But the reality is, with the time we have left, recovery for me is the notion of being sort of preemptive rather than reacting. Most people wait until they get sore, wait until they get sick, wait until something happens before they do the things necessary to help bring their body back to a steady state, rather than being proactive about it and trying to prevent or minimize the amount of damage that you're doing to your body in a weekly cycle and a monthly cycle, et cetera, et cetera. And so all of the things you've listed are on this. I think earlier, as I said, I have this plate of information, and we do what we call Teaching Tuesday talk. So on Tuesdays, we don't have dry lands, but I have the kids come in 45 minutes before a workout, and it's, in essence, it's a TED talk. Sometimes it's could cover any and everything, but part of that process is engaging the kids in a conversation about what are we doing to help our body feel better. And we can get into specificity, the nutritional content. One of the first things we talked about many years ago is, what do you do when you leave the pool? Do you have a little ice chest in your trunk that has maybe a chocolate milk and a small bar? Even before you get home and worry about dinner and homework and everything, what are you doing to start the recuperative process for your body? What are you bringing pre-practice? If we have a 45-minute dry land and then we have an hour and 45-minute training session, and all you've brought is a 12-ounce bottle of water, how's your body going to do at the end of that 2.5, 3 hour window? Are you bringing in snacks that your body can absorb and help you during the course of that training session? How many days a week are you addressing towards areas of need? Could be flexibility, could be ankle flexibility, it could be muscle recovery at home. I usually tell the kids a minimum of 3 times a week you need to set aside 10 to 15 minutes and address something physical, whether that's something as simple as rolling out, using a lacrosse ball, tennis ball, what have you, getting a Theragun, taking a hot soak, whatever the case may be. But all of this gets even into more specifics. Are there kids who need to wear compression wear at certain times of the year or when we travel to help with their body? Do some kids, again, when you have developing athletes, some kids' hematocrit levels get really low. Do they need extra vitamins in their multivitamin in their dietary intake? I think, again, I don't want to use up all of our time on this, but I think if you're not at least putting it in front of them, my main goal, as I say, is to give them all that information. If you don't absorb it on day one, that's okay. But if you're not absorbing it by the time you leave my pool to go somewhere else and compete, hopefully in college, then I haven't done my job well. And I think you put that out in emails, you post it up on your website, you have your group contacts, any way that you can continue to put that up. We have a dry erase board that has all of our information on it. We come up with, things and stuff that I've stolen. I think I stole from Brent Archie. We have FTT for the team. What are you doing right now for the team that's going to help the overall team grow and develop? And that can be inclusive of reminding people about doing their recovery work. We have another one that's MPE, mental, physical, and emotional. What are you doing in the course of the week to address to make sure those 3 phases of your developmental process are being addressed appropriately? And obviously, when we talk about the physical, that deals with recovery specifically. I think, sometimes, honestly, everybody, adults included, need recovery in the framework of how do you just chill out for a moment? How do you hit the reset button? And we've done stuff as simple as, putting on your headphones, getting on a good chill playlist and go lay down for 20 minutes. We've had kids who do the little Buddhist bell chants and they do a little bit of meditation on their own. Meditation is hard. That's a evolving process over a lifetime, but does that aid in recovery? If your mind is in a great place, I have to think it's going to help your body be in a better place as well. So recovery is such an expansive conversation, but if you're not doing it, and I would tell you, if you're not introducing it at age group levels, I would say as young as maybe you can do diaphragmatic breathing with 10 and 11-year-olds. There's nothing wrong with introducing some principles of yoga at a young age. But developing them and adding pieces along that process and that pathway so that when you get an athlete who's an elite athlete, they have systems in play that work for them to allow their bodies to perform the way we're asking them to perform now. You're not asking a world-class 100-meter freestyler, a 4,800-meter freestyler to go to a meet and swim 54. If he's suiting up and he's going and traveling someplace and spending money to compete, he wants to be 48, 49, worst case 50 seconds. And if he's going 50 seconds, you're going, what's wrong? What do we have to tweak? Are you a little bit too tired, too fatigued? Do we need more recovery in the process, right? So I think if you're creating a pathway that enables those systems to be in play, and I would tell you, since every human is different, it's challenging them to experiment and try different things and see which systems work for you, and even taking it a step further, what worked for you at 16 might not work for you at 18. You're a different person. You may have grown 3 inches. You may have put on 10 pounds of muscle. You may have switched some of your specialties and which areas you have to work on. So there's no way for me to shorten a conversation on recovery down, but I think the premise of recovery is as important as how well you're attempting to get a kid into quote unquote great shape. Great shape doesn't mean anything if you're not doing anything that's going to allow that body to actually be ready to go when you really want it to go.
Yeah. Well, good stuff, man. This has been really cool, and like you said, we can talk for hours, which we have, and we'll probably continue the conversation beyond. But I'm glad this is kind of sparking people's, thinking as well.
Are you in need of a pace clock? Looking to finally upgrade those ancient analog clocks? The SWIMNERD Pace Clock is the most innovative digital pace clock. Go to swimpractice.com to check it out.
I know that you're also heavily involved in the outlook of USA Swimming, right? Like not just the the early stages of getting kids to want to be great athletes and maybe represent their country one day, but you're also involved in kind of the behind the scenes, maybe some of the vision stuff for the way that USA Swimming is run and should be run. So what's your state on where USA Swimming is right now? Because I know that you are very opinionated on this, and you should be, because you're the one that's I got a massive influence on the youth that's going to be the next Caleb Dressel, Natalie Coughlin, those types of people. So where are we in USA Swimming right now?
I think everybody wants to pull the fire alarm and say the building's on fire. I wouldn't go that far. I think we're at a challenging crossroads. We're entering a home Olympic quadrennium. We have, through however it all lined up, we have 3 key positions in our administration that we have to replace, being the CEO and hopefully a national team and junior national team director, all of which I think are critical in terms of the pathways that are created for developing athletes to be able to hopefully ascend to their max potential and hopefully go on and win medals for our country. I think for this unique circumstances where you've had 3 people that are in, or 2 people that are in critical roles step away, and the identification of having that third in terms of a junior team coach put back into play. I think the processes are challenging. It's not. I went to a meeting in Colorado a little over a week ago, and a lot of this was discussed there. I think there was a lot of good discussion had with some of the executive board members, the existing USA Swimming members that were there, and some club coaches from around the country. And, there's an agreement. The challenges are, because of this situation right now, hiring one over the other, and what priority is, it's almost impossible to do. You need to have a CEO in place, but the CEO is going to take, if I had to guess, probably about 6 months to get actually put in place. I think that potentially holds back the ability to have a national team director hired, because if you put somebody in play today and the new CEO, who's typically responsible for hiring that position, comes into play and doesn't want that national team director, they can let that person go. And the person might have been on the job for 3 or 4 months. So there's some tricky areas in this that don't make it as easy as, hey, let's go out. We've got plenty of great people involved in the sport, and let's put so-and-so in this position and we'll fix the pathway. I think I would say this: I'm cautiously optimistic. I think there's enough great leadership in our sport. There are great coaches and coaching minds. I think there are people who have had a wealth of experience nationally and internationally as coaches, that they can help shape and direct our program in a positive direction, so that we can be the dominant swimming country that we've been in the past. But I just don't think it's going to be that, let's get on SwimSwam, throw out 20 or 30 names and have everybody agree that this coach is the best coach, this person's the best person, because there's some nuances to it that are going to make it a little bit harder than that. Having said that, I don't want to, like I said, I don't think the building's on fire. I think somebody's seen some smoke off in the distance, and they want to make sure that we don't let that become a big fire. And so like I said, I think if we have this conversation in April and nothing's done, then maybe you can start to pull the fire alarm buttons a little bit. But right now, I think there are enough mechanisms in place for there to be appropriate choices made to help our country get to where we are. Because to me, it's never been a question of overall talent level, the ability to develop athletes. And we've always had holes in areas, and there's areas we can get better at and worse at. For a lot of years, how come we can't get an American male under 15 minutes in the mile, and now we have the world record holder in the mile? So narratives can change. I don't necessarily think it's solely we have to go back and revamp the system. I think we have to have some good leadership at the top end and create the links from that top end throughout the coaching culture, not just the collegiate environment, but I think specifically the club environment, and get some good, exchange of ideas and thoughts on how are we going to develop the next group of athletes through, so that the athletes shouldn't be the ones who have to try to figure out what their pathway is. We should be providing them a pathway and making it for them to walk down and have the success that they're capable of having. And I think right now it's not necessarily as easy as it should be. So I think if I had to say it, cautiously optimistic. Let's check back in about 6 or 7 months, and then we can decide whether we need to pull an alarm button or kind of be happy with which direction we're heading.
What about the nationalism in terms of, look, the America that I grew up competing against and admiring, there was very much a system of, if you were an American coach, you coached American athletes, and we made America great type thing, right? Like it does seem like we've moved away from that approach a little bit now, where some of the top coaches are coaching some of the top foreign athletes, and it seems to be okay. It's almost like that's kind of just accepted now, whereas that wasn't the norm before. That was looked down upon, or was even, coaches were told they couldn't do that. So it does seem like, look, the world is getting smaller. Even the people listening to this podcast right now are from all over the world. You've given some of your best sets to some of the best coaches around the world. So it's not like I'm saying that we shouldn't be doing certain things, but certainly I feel like the approach America has taken has shifted for sure. It seems to, we've got away from the nationalism a bit of like anyone can coach anyone and everybody's okay with that. Does it make sense?
Yeah, no. I think there's always, to an extent, been a process by which we've always had top foreign athletes in our country. I mean, you go back to the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, and the Cal men's team, which was dominant, had Swedes and Canadians in their program, and they had great American athletes as well, but that helped them win. I think every country has had some form of athletes come over the States for the most part. I think why it's a two-pronged answer here, why it's a little bit more visual now that some of the most dominant athletes on the planet happen to be training, at their home base is in the States. If those same athletes were training here and they were making the A final in the Olympics but not winning a medal, I don't think this whole nationalism thing would be up in arms. But when you have an athlete winning gold medals for another country being coached, then suddenly, again, the house is on fire. I don't think the difference is as great as we tend to make it. I kind of fall on the side that anytime you can get the best minds, best athletes, best whomever together in a room and have them train, have them talk shop, have them talk science, I think it's good. Obviously, when we go to a competition and you have to wear your country's flag and you're trying to be the best for the best athlete in the world in that moment, you've got to be able to have some sort of distinguishing factor. I think if we look at it from a collegiate system, a college, the college coaches have to win to a certain extent because their jobs are based on that. If no one's going to retain a coach who's going to lose every dual meet, do terrible at conference, and do terrible at NC2As. They're going to get retained because they have the best program they put forward. In some cases, they have to do that by getting foreign athletes into assist. And if that results in those foreign athletes becoming good international or better international athletes, that's part and parcel by the system we've created. The system we've created, like anything else in the world, basically comes down to dollars. If I get my bonus.
Yeah, but what about this? Like I saw Michael Phelps actively cheering on an American network at the Olympics, cheering on a foreign athlete in front of the whole world. Like the greatest American swimmer in history is cheering on a foreign athlete on national television at the Olympics. To me, I was like, I can't imagine a time when I would ever see Tom Dolan doing that. Like
I would say this though, if that was, again, if that was Marchand and another Bob Bowman coached American athlete swimming side by side, he'd be cheering for both equally as loud. I think that's more of a connection. Is the optics maybe not the best optics on the planet? Sure, but that's just a young athlete who's basically in some ways following in Michael's footsteps, the template that he created and how good he's become as an overall all-around athlete, and he's training under his former coach. I think you can't help but kind of root for him. Would you have loved to have him?
No, I get that. I understand that aspect of it for sure. I agree with that. But it's like the American psyche that I grew up with is that it was America first and only. Like the only thing that mattered was America winning, and American pride. And that's how I grew up. I'm just saying it. And look, it's just not my perspective. It was the reality of the 90s. Like, you had guys that held up representing their country as the greatest thing of all. And I'm not saying Michael didn't do that. Michael certainly did that. But yeah, it just seems like the psyche of the American swimmer has changed, where it doesn't seem to have that nationalism that it used to have. And maybe the results are showing. Look, I could be wrong, but it's that way.
I think it's a more nuanced conversation. I think part of that nuance is our athletes, we used to not travel as much and do all these World Cups and all these other types of things. And it was, you bled red, white, and blue. And when you got gathered as an American contingent, you were there to go out and be the best in the world.
Right.
It still exists. I think the notion is that now so much of our own contingent are pro athletes. They travel the world all year. They become, all of these athletes from all the countries become sort of international citizens who all know each other really well in and away from the pool. And in some cases, they're their own teammates back at whatever club or college they're training at, that the lines are blurred. And I think where you'll see the differences come back to is when you have, if I say this, it's going to sound like I'm being critical of the current system, which I'm not. But when you get back to having a strong national team director and a strong junior national team director, they're the ones I think that are ultimately responsible for making you say, we're going to bleed red, white, and blue and go USA and, down with the Aussies and, whomever else we're trying to race against in the moment. I think that's the focus of your top end leadership, and to bleed that message all the ways down to club level and developmental levels. I think, as of late, for good or for bad, what swimming is really become is at the top end, how much can we capitalize on the moment? And they should. I don't want this to sound wrong. How much money can we make? How much visibility can we create? All that sort of stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. I think every athlete who's made it to that level deserves everything that they can get from their successes. But I think it does dissuade a little bit from how people feel about, well, we didn't dominate the medal table. We didn't do this. We didn't do that. It's a tough call. And I think with modern swimming, the challenge is how do you create that focus where, twice every 4 years, it's all about that flag you're wearing on the side of your cap, and it's all about the country you're representing. But the rest of the time, you're still being an international athlete, seeing countries, traveling, making new friends who may represent another nation, and expanding your own growth and knowledge and pathway. It's a fine line. I think, swimming is very much an international commodity now, and we'd be silly to think that there are not going to be great athletes who come from all over the world who are going to do impressive things. It's not going to be where any one country is just going to roll into an Olympics and get 1, 2 in every event. Those days are long since gone. But I think to answer the initial question, nationalistic fervor, I think is there. It needs to be sort of honed in so that in the moments it needs to be there, it needs to be there. In the moments where you're, again, this may sound terrible, but in the moments where you're coaching for your own self-vested interests and the best athletes you can have gather in your pool, whatever flags they might be representing, you're going to put those best kids in the water and have them mix it up and see who comes out on top. And I don't think either is wrong. I think there's challenges to both for sure, especially if it costs you gold medals. There's challenges. There's no doubt about it. I don't think
I appreciate you even partaking in this part of the conversation. It certainly wasn't my plan, and it wasn't something that came up. I just think of you as, look, the way that I truly appreciate you is that you're at the grassroots of this thing, feeding the system, right? And you're working your butt off to make American athletes great, to make American swimming great. And like I said, you're at that feeder system where you're filtering kids off to college who then hopefully go on to represent their country. I mean, you're certainly getting them at the junior national level, and America seems to be still the most dominant country at the junior level. Like, there's no one even close at the junior level. So where is the disconnect between the junior swimming and the senior swimming and this idea of nationalism? Like I said, it's just a conversation. I'm glad you're willing to at least partake in it. And I certainly didn't want to throw you under the bus or put you on the spot, but you're just a guy to me that I hold up in such high regard in terms of the work that you put in to create this system that the senior elites can feed from. You know what I mean? Sure. And so that's kind of why I brought it up in that sense. And I know that you certainly wouldn't, want to. You've just got a lot of pride too. You've got a lot of pride in your country and what you do for it. And again, it's just something that, like you said, we got 4 years to the LA Olympics where all eyes are going to be on the U.S. swim team. It's like, how do you get that spark back of like America's number one? And I felt like in Paris for an extended period of time there, it just seemed like that was lost. And then all of a sudden, you had a couple of females come through and do really well. And then at the end of the meet, you had Bobby do what Bobby did, which to me brought back some of that nationalism, that feeling of like pride in America, and it took a swim like that to say, like, we're going to shove it to the rest of the world. Like that to me was one of those swims where he put the flag on his chest and just went and then broke that world record. That to me is a typical American swim that I was used to seeing growing up.
Yeah, I would say two things. And first of all, I agree with what you're saying. I mean, I've been around this long enough where there's things that I say that in the past that I know I've been mistaken on. There's things I absolutely stand by, and that holds true for today's conversation. If someone wants to engage in a spirited conversation about these things, 100%. I think there's not a right or wrong. It's what you believe in the moment and how you are able to communicate effectively what that belief is. I would say one side of your commentary, I would bet or venture to guess, if I walked around to every summer league team, community team, club team around the country and ask them, USA number one, unquestionably at a grassroots level. And you could, and I don't even want to not count top club programs, top collegiate programs, you could still get that mentality of USA is number one and we're the best. So I don't think it's been eliminated. It may, because of the perception of the results and how they seem to the rest of the world, that it's been muted a bit. But I think it goes back to how do we then get that messaging back across from our top end down so that everyone knows we're going in it, to battle, quote unquote, the best other countries in the world and make sure that USA comes out on top. But my second point, and this goes back to the beginning of swimming, all the stuff that we do as coaches is as a direct result of our interactions with people around the planet and around the country. Like one of my best friends growing up in swimming is Rowan Taylor. Rowan Taylor grew up in California. Well, he was born in Australia, but he grew up, spent his formative high school years and age group developmental years in Northern California. He swam on a team and I competed against him growing up. And he's now the head of Australian Swimming. In the course of our journey throughout our swimming lives, we've shared ideas, we've shared thoughts, we've talked about things, and it doesn't mean, you know, he's giving away state secrets for Australian swimming, and I'm not leaking any of the magic sauce that American swimming has. We're just having conversations as coaches. And yeah, I've been fortunate in my journey as a coach to be exposed to several great people in our country, great coaches in our country, great coaches from around the world. And all of it are just conversations. I think it's more of a rarity, and some people will disagree with this, but I think it's more of a rarity where people will close themselves off and say, I don't want to talk about that. I'm going to give away a secret that's going to, you know, put your athlete over mine. I don't doubt that it happens, and I'm sure it does. But I think for the most part, in that journey you're creating for yourself, it's your own personal growth that you're looking at selfishly. So your ability to talk and have conversations with other coaches from other countries and, you know, other great club coaches from around the country only expands your ability to communicate the message you're trying to do. Whether I agree or disagree with these people, it fosters thought and conversation. And I think when we do this, just like the conversation you and I are having now, we're going to walk away from it with some thoughts about how that experience this last hour and change has been. Okay. And how we utilize it moving forward becomes the important component. So if it's deemed like one of the main things that's taken away from this conversation is how do we regain USA's nationalistic pride, sit down and have conversations. Talk to people in your own LSCs, your own sphere of influence. Maybe it's within your own college program, and bring that forward and keep having it be just at that surface so that it stays fresh in everybody's mind, so that when 28 rolls around, there's not a question of whether or not we're going to be good. It's how good will we end up being, and how, you know, hopefully how dominant can we be again. So yeah, I think that's kind of more of how I would look at it in that process.
Yeah, well said, mate. I appreciate that, and I think that clears up a lot of things for people in terms of what you think too. You know, so that's great, and you've always been willing to have conversations about any of this stuff. So I appreciate you greatly, and this has been fun, mate. We certainly would need to do it again, whether it's recorded or not. But mate, keep up the good work, and good luck with your team this season. All right.
Appreciate it, Brett. Thanks so much for having me on. Best of luck to you moving forward too.
Thanks, Tony. Take care, man.
All right, we'll see you.
Bye. You want to swim faster? You need Sprint Revolution resistance equipment. This isn't just gear, it's a game changer. Our propellers, power socks, stretch cords, parachutes, and paddles are all designed to build explosive speed and power in the water. If you're serious about taking your swim to the next level, you need the best resistance gear out there. Sprint Revolution, where speed is born.